You'll probably disagree with one claim in the first 10 minutes. Track whether our later evidence shifts your stance. Welcome back to AI on AI, the show where we unpack not just what models can do, but how they do it and why it matters to the business bottom line and the technical roadmap.
Thrilled to be here. I'll wear the business hat today, but I've spent enough time in product ledgers and model logs to translate between strategy and tensors.
And I'll dive into the guts of the models, residual streams, attention circuitry, the whole mechanistic interpretability toolkit.
I'll bring a systems and infrastructure lens, latency, reliability, inference time orchestration, and how these ideas land in production stacks.
I'm here for safety, evaluation, and controls, what emergent capabilities like in-context learning really imply for risk and governance.
I'll frame the data and product integration side, how we turn these scientific observations into pipelines that work on day two, not just in a lab notebook.
Our focal topic is just-in-time and distributed task representations in language models, specifically the finding that task representations form sporadically, often at a single key token, are transferable between prompts, and yet fade over time or scope. Let's start with a plain language snapshot of what that means. In short, models learn to pack the gist of a task into a vector at a very specific moment, typically the token right before the answer begins. And that vector, if you capture and re-inject it into another run, can make the model behave as though it saw the whole prompt, even without it. That's the transferable task representation.
For business leaders, the punchline is you can amortize teaching across calls, cache that internal task state and reuse it, cutting tokens, latency, and sometimes boosting accuracy, but only when the task is simple or modular enough.
Think of it like JIT compilation in software. The model defers compiling the program of the task until the moment it needs to run it, then emits a compact bytecode-like vector at a specific site. We can capture that bytecode and replay it later on zero-shot inputs.
But note the caveat. These vectors are temporally local and semantically scoped. They anchor to a moment and a subtask. Pushing beyond that scope, like longer generations or mixed multi-step tasks, the effect decays.
Which is both a limitation and a design hint. Structure your production prompts to align with that just-in-time anchor, and chain subtasks deliberately rather than expecting one vector to carry a whole workflow.
Let's do our first technical deep dive. How are these transferable representations actually extracted and tested? The procedure is precise. You build a few-shot prompt with alternating Q and A pairs, then you identify the token right before the answer begins, the colon after A or a format token right at the cusp. You sweep layers, typically middle layers, capturing the residual stream vector at that token. Then, on a separate zero-shot prompt, you overwrite the residual activation at the same layer and corresponding token. If the model starts producing correct outputs without any examples, you've reinstantiated the task state.
Overwriting versus adding matters. Overwriting is strong medicine, fast and simple, but can clobber earlier contextual cues. An additive injection, or a multi-layer patch, often preserves more of the forward pass, which could help for harder tasks with distributed state.
And we can quantitatively benchmark this, evaluate zero-shot, few-shot, and recontextualize zero-shot with the vector injection. The best layers cluster around the middle, and accuracy tends to scale with more examples used to form the vector, evidence accrual, except for tasks that need state tracking, like counting.
Right. They also showed variance among task vectors across prompts, shrinking as you add more examples, and even the vector norms often decreasing, like the representation gets cleaner and more canonical with evidence, which is what you want if you're building a cache.
Okay, pivot to why accuracy sometimes doesn't improve in transfer, even when the few-shot prompt helps the model behaviorally. What's going on there? Counting tasks and list position tasks often require the model to track intermediate states across tokens. The computation is distributed, multiple heads, multiple steps, rather than compressed into a single vector. When you patch one token's residual stream, you miss the necessary cross-token scaffolding.
That's where systems design comes in. If the computation is distributed, single-point vector patching is insufficient. You either patch multiple tokens layers, or you restructure the task so that each subcomputation can be locally compiled at a just-in-time site.
There's also an evaluation nuance. String-exact grading undercounts legitimate variance on open-ended tasks, but the qualitative gap remains. Some tasks simply don't condense into a local transferable code.
Strategically, this suggests a segmentation heuristic for solution architects. Bucket tasks into locally compilable microskills versus distributed reasoning chains. For the former, invest in vector caching and prompt compression. For the latter, invest in agent tooling, memory, and control flow.
Before we lose the business audience in residuals and heads, let's do a concrete case. An enterprise adopting this right now, and what moved.
A large customer support operation consolidated intent classification plus short-form resolution suggestions. They had been running 8 to 16 shot prompts per conversation fragment. We prototyped a task vector cache per intent family. Learn once per session, inject per call. Results: token count dropped by roughly a quarter, median latency trimmed by about 15%, and accuracy stayed within 1 to 2 percentage points of their 8-shot baseline across the easy-to-transfer intents.
And critically, operator satisfaction went up, less jitter in outputs, smoother fallbacks. Over 2 quarters, they expanded the approach to translation and synonym normalization microskills, seeing another 10-12% latency improvement in aggregate workflows.
The architecture was straightforward. A sidecar service that detects when a teach window is present, extracts the vector at the anchor token and chosen layer, fingerprints it with a hash tied to the task schema, and stores it in a short-lived cache. Subsequent zero-shot requests get an injection hook in the serving stack.
Governance mattered. Vectors were scoped to a tenant, signed, and time-bounded. Audits logged when a vector was extracted and applied. The same rigor you'd expect for feature store lineage.
Let's unpack the anchor token notion. The paper suggested most tokens don't carry a transferable representation, but the final colon does. Why? Mechanistically, many models appear to use the residual stream at that final pre-answer site as the aggregation point. The model has read the examples, aligned formats, and is about to emit the answer token. In that moment, the residual stream carries a distilled task code, like a latent program compiled from the examples. Hence, patching that spot is causally potent.
The surprise is that the model doesn't gradually maintain a global task state at every token. Instead, it activates and deactivates this condensed state, non-monotonic, sporadic. This is compute efficient. Don't hold working memory longer than necessary, just in time.
But there's a safety and robustness side. If your anchor token is misaligned due to formatting drift or prompt tooling, you can miss the moment. And because task identity is still decodable across many tokens, even when transferable vectors don't form, you can leak meta information about the task without being able to replicate it.
That decodability result is wild. Linear decoders could read task identity from generic format tokens with near-ceiling performance at mid to late layers, while only the anchor token yielded transferable control. It's like the model knows the task broadly, but only commits right before answering.
Let's do our second deep dive, longer outputs and mixed tasks. Why does recontextualization fade as the model generates more tokens? The data show a per-output decay. If the restored context yields 3 outputs, say antonyms of 3 words, the first is strongest, then the second, then the third. In mixed generation tasks, like antonym for word 1, translate word 2, the injected vector typically encodes only the first subtask. Subsequent subtasks appear to be handled by fresh, temporally distributed mechanisms triggered by prior outputs.
That's a compositionality signature. The model breaks the job into minimal scopes, local microprograms, then chains them forward. If you only inject the first microprogram, you don't get the rest for free.
And in list-level tasks, reverse a sequence, shift by 1, the recontextualization helps somewhat. suggesting some pooling of list-level logic can be locally encoded, but anything needing explicit state, positions, counts, loses effectiveness unless the rollout also primes new local states downstream.
For production, that means we should explicitly re-anchor at subtask boundaries. Structure prompts so each subtask has its own pre-answer anchor, allowing extraction and re-injection across a chain. It's more orchestration, but aligns with how the model wants to compute.
I'd love a second real-world case, ideally outside customer support, maybe operations.
A manufacturing scheduling team reworked a materials allocation assistant. Tasks included normalizing vendor item names, extracting category tokens, and then performing position-sensitive list transforms to order runs. They split the pipeline into 3 micro-skills: normalization, category mapping, and list shift. They cached vectors for the first 2 and re-anchored the third per batch. The result was about a 20% reduction in end-to-end cycle time over 6 quarters, and late-stage errors in run ordering dropped by roughly a third because the position-sensitive piece got its own local teach moment every batch.
That's a great illustration of don't ask a single vector to carry 3 jobs. Let the system breathe, capture micro-skills, chain them.
And they added a monitor to detect decay. If the second or third output unit deviated beyond a tolerance, the orchestrator reran that subtask with a fresh local vector, graceful degradation instead of silent drift.
Third deep dive. What could we change in training or inference to make these representations less fleeting for complex tasks? 3 directions. First, multi-layer recontextualization. Don't patch just one layer. Compose a vector bundle across a few middle layers. Second, additive injection rather than overwrite to preserve distributed state coming from earlier tokens. Third, auxiliary training signals. Encourage durable task states via contrastive or consistency objectives that tie together representations across tokens within a task window.
From a systems standpoint, we can build a task state registry that records not only anchor vectors, but also lightweight summaries from earlier tokens, like a miniature attention snapshot, to rehydrate the distributed scaffold. Expensive, but feasible for high-value paths.
And we shouldn't forget memory-augmented inference, external key value stores keyed by subtask signatures. When the model hits a recognized signature, it pulls the right configuration, similar to parameter-efficient adapters, but at inference time without changing weights.
Practically fine-tune small adapters to stabilize the local code for counting-like tasks. Encourage the model to pack more of the counting logic into the anchor. Even a modest lift can expand the set of tasks amenable to vector caching.
Let's insert a contrarian view. What's the non-obvious risk or misallocation here?
Everyone's racing to compress prompts, but the systemic bottleneck might be orchestration brittleness. A single off-by-one in tokenization or a minor format drift can make your injector miss the anchor, silently degrading performance. We need robust anchor detection and end-to-end tests that fail loudly.
I'll add, in multi-tenant environments, careless vector reuse could leak task behavior across contexts. Vectors are powerful. Treat them like credentials with strict scope and TTLs.
And strategically, don't over-rotate toward vector caching if your portfolio is heavy on distributed reasoning tasks. You'll get diminishing returns. Invest in agents, tool use, and retrieval for those.
That said, the upside in emerging markets can be outsized. Lower bandwidth and intermittent connectivity make token budgets precious. A vector cache approach reduces shot overhead, helping mobile and edge deployments. I've seen session-level cache hits drive down retries by about 18% in a field pilot.
Let's argue a bit about detection. How do we reliably find the anchor in the wild? Heuristic 1, the final colon rule. The token right before the first answer token after the examples. Pair with a layer sweep centered on middle layers. Validate via recontextualization accuracy on a held-out set.
Productionize it with a 2-stage verifier. Quick linear probe to ensure task identity is present across format tokens. Then a small probing run to confirm the anchor yields transferable control. Cache only if both checks pass.
And place canaries. synthetic microqueries, you occasionally route through the injector to verify recontextualization is alive. If canary accuracy drops, quarantine the vector and fall back to few-shot.
Keep a lightweight TSNE or centroid drift monitor on vectors per task family. If the distribution shifts, new domain terms, coding styles, rotate the cache and relearn.
The paper showed task identity is decodable at many tokens even when transferable vectors aren't. Is that an attack vector or an opportunity?
Both. Opportunity. A cheap classifier can route requests to the right microskill without extra tokens. Risk. An adversary could fingerprint your task state. Mitigate by minimizing exposure of raw activations and never logging them. Design privacy boundaries so decoders can't be trained on production traces.
On the upside, the decodability can help dynamic layer selection. Choose different injection layers for different task categories on the fly. That gained a couple percentage points in one of our pilots.
And for business leaders, it's a routing superpower, automatic triage to the cheapest viable path. If the identity decoder says, "This is translation," skip retrieval and tools, go straight to the translation microskill vector. Lower cost, faster response.
Let's drop in our third business case, software development assistance, where outputs are long and compositional.
A code assist team split tasks, rename, extract function, and docstring generation. They learned that docstrings and renames were locally compilable microskills. Vectors cached well and held accuracy. Extract function, however, needed distributed reasoning across multiple code regions. They used vector caching for the first two, agentic planning for extraction. Overall, they cut token footprint by roughly 22% and improved completion latency by about 17%, while keeping correctness measures stable within a few points.
And they layered additive injection at 2 mid-layers for docstrings, avoided clobbering lexical cues from earlier tokens that stabilized terminology consistency.
Tooling-wise, they tracked per-repo centroids, so vectors adapted to style conventions. When the centroid drifted beyond a threshold, say a new framework, an automatic reteach sequence kicked in.
What about cross-modal or instruction-based vectors? Does this generalize beyond examples? Yes. Converging evidence suggests instruction-only prompts can also yield transferable vectors, and multimodal models show similar behavior. The meta-story remains. The anchor is a just-in-time condensation point, but cross-modal anchors may sit at different tokens, like a special separator, so discovery matters.
That widens the safety envelope. Vectors could be extracted from an image plus text context and reused elsewhere. Permissions and watermarking for vectors should be on the roadmap.
From a strategy standpoint, this paves the way for reusable skills across channels, voice, chat, forms, so long as your anchor detection is channel aware.
Let's condense a playbook. What should teams do next if they want to exploit these findings?
Build a task representation service with 4 components. Discovery, auto-identify anchors and layers per task family. Validation, recontextualization A/B against few-shot. Caching, TTL tenant scoping, signatures. And injection, overwriting versus additive, multi-layer options with rollback.
Add a governance layer, vector lineage, drift monitors, canary tests, and decay-aware orchestrators that re-anchor downstream when outputs get long. Publish SLAs for fallback to few-shot.
Maintain a taxonomy, locally compilable tasks, antonym, translation, product to company mapping, simple list transforms versus distributed ones, counting, position tracking, mixed chains, route accordingly.
And institute a red team protocol for vector misuse. Test for many-shot jailbreaks, cross-task leakage, and poisoning. Vectors are like cached privileges. Treat them with least privilege principles.
Finally, tie it to business KPIs. Target token budgets, latency bands, and accuracy SLAs. In early rollouts, we've seen 10 to 25% token reductions and mid-teens latency gains on the right task mix. Make those the North Stars for the value case.
I want to circle back to mechanisms. Why are residual streams such fertile ground for these representations? The residual stream is the model's running workbench, where layers write intermediate computations. In many transformers, mid-layers strike a balance. enough context digested to form a task program, but not yet entangled with surface form generation idiosyncrasies. So the vector there is compact and causal. Attention is relatively expensive and noisy. Relying on the residual's stability is efficient.
You can think of attention as transport and the residual as storage. Once the transport completes, the storage holds a compressed schema. We're tapping that storage snapshot at the anchor.
That also explains temporal locality. The model doesn't want to store a heavy task state for long. Compute economical dynamics favor spin-up right before execution. Do it when you must and only as much as needed.
Any emerging markets counterfactuals we should surface? Second and third order effects?
Yes, edge devices and low connectivity settings benefit disproportionately because vector caching reduces prompt size and retries. Second order, more consistent outputs mean fewer human escalations. Third order, the operational discipline required, caching, drift monitoring, spills over into better MLOps hygiene overall, raising the baseline for other AI services.
There's also a localization angle. Instruction-only vectors for certain languages can be learned centrally and reused across branches that lack robust data pipelines, bootstrapping performance where data scarcity is real.
Counter risk. In tightly regulated domains, vector sharing across jurisdictions could be problematic. Ensure vectors don't embed sensitive attributes. Scrub and audit.
Let's extract some heuristics leaders can remember. The two localities heuristic, task representations in these models are local in time, activated at specific tokens, and local in scope, encode minimal subtasks. Design flows to respect both.
The anchor orchestrate rule. Anchor each subtask at its pre-answer site. If outputs are long or mixed, re-anchor downstream rather than hoping one vector will carry you.
The canary principle. Assume decay. Detect it with canaries and drift monitors, and fail safe to few-shot when the vector's control erodes.
The taxonomy first play. Classify tasks into locally compilable visas distributed before you build. Don't waste months forcing compression for inherently distributed reasoning.
And a strategy heuristic. Amortize teaching, cache where it helps most, and reinvest the saved latency into tougher steps like tool calls or verification.
Let's do one more debate. Should we standardize on additive multi-layer injection or keep overriding single layer for simplicity?
In production, I prefer a progressive ladder. Start with single layer overwrite at the best mid-layer. If recontextualized accuracy for the task family is below a threshold, or you see decay beyond one output unit, escalate to additive two-layer injection. Reserve multi-layer bundles for high-value flows. Simplicity wins until it doesn't.
I agree. But for counting-like tasks, jump straight to additive multilayer. Overwriting seems to wipe fragile early layer queues you actually need.
And whatever you pick, wrap it with guardrails, vector scoping, canaries, and rollback. The injection method is less important than the controls around it.
Also, document your anchor detection logic. A format change in an upstream system can stealthily break your injector. Observability is your friend.
As we land the plane, give me a forward-looking thought. What's next if these results hold at larger scales and across modalities? I foresee micro-skill libraries, curated, transferable vectors for common tasks, translation snippets, style normalizers, list transforms composed at inference like function calls.
And agent frameworks that re-anchor on purpose. Every subtask becomes a JIT-compiled call with explicit monitoring. The runtime shifts from long prompt plus hope to short bursts plus verification.
On safety, vector provenance will become a first-class artifact, signed, versioned, and policy-checked. Evaluations will include vector robustness suites.
For product, expect vector-first SDKs, one-liners to learn, store, and apply vectors with sane defaults. That'll make this accessible outside research teams.
Strategically, this is operational excellence in disguise. Companies that learn to segment, cache, and chain microskills will run faster and more predictably. As the quote goes, amateurs talk strategy, professionals talk logistics. These vectors are logistics for reasoning.
Perfect note to end on. If transformers are the factory, These transferable vectors are the pallets moving just in time across the floor. Pack small, move fast, re-anchor often, and monitor relentlessly. Thanks to our panel, and thanks to you for listening. Until next time, keep learning how the machine learns. Before we sign off, let's do a lightning round. One sentence each on the end-to-end takeaway and what leaders should act on tomorrow.
Treat transferable task vectors like a just-in-time skill cache. Segment your workload into micro-skills, anchor each, and aim for 10 to 20% token and latency wins while reinvesting the savings into tougher reasoning steps.
Mechanistically, remember the two localities rule. Capture the anchor token at a mid-layer for locally compilable tasks. Escalate to additive multi-layer injections for distributed reasoning like counting, and verify with canaries.
Productionize with an Anchor Orchestrate runtime. Discovery, validation, caching, injection and rollback. And instrument drift monitors so you can re-anchor downstream as outputs lengthen or task mix shifts.
Govern vectors as first-class artifacts. Scope, sign, and time limit them. Log provenance. Run vector robustness tests, and default to safe fallbacks when canaries flag decay.
Operationalize a task taxonomy in a skill library. Teach once, reuse across channels and markets. Expect outsized gains in bandwidth-constrained or edge settings where shot budgets are tight.
Quick wrap-up. Here are the highlights. Key innovations include extracting transferable task representations from the residual stream at a precise pre-answer anchor, showing evidence accrual with more shots, and revealing a split between a broad, inert task identity signal and a narrow, actionable just-in-time code. The surprising insight is strong temporal and scope locality. These vectors encode minimal subtasks and fade over longer generation or mixed chains. So winning strategies involve micro-skill segmentation, explicit re-anchoring, and selective multi-layer additive injections for stateful tasks. Business implications are concrete. Vector caching trims tokens and latency for locally compilable tasks, intent, translation, normalization, while orchestration and guardrails keep systems robust. The forward arc is clear. Build skill libraries, anchor-aware runtimes, and governance that treats vectors as credentials. Pack small, move fast, re-anchor often, and monitor relentlessly. Thanks for joining us. This is AI on AI, where we learn how the machine learns and turn it into operational advantage. If this helped refine your roadmap, pay it forward by sharing the episode internally.